AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny, it's not robust, it's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does.
The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them, because the people know the truth. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast, a Breitbart.com podcast. The podcast starts now. Here's Curt with today's headlines.
Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Curt Schilling Podcast. Got a good show lined up for you today. Brandon Darby from Breitbart Texas is going to join us. Brandon is down at the border, which, even though the left would have you move on to another subject, there's still a lot of stuff happening down there that I think should be at the front of the discussion. And Brandon is one of those guys pushing the Cartel Chronicles on Breitbart.com. If you have a chance to see that, go to Breitbart Texas on Breitbart.com and check out Brandon's work. And then Cam Edwards, the host of Cam and Company from NRA TV, will be joining us after Brandon. But first, we're going to kick off, as we do each day, with sound bites that shows you can be somebody in our government and still be an idiot, number one, that you can be completely unhinged and have no rationale that is common or normal and still work in our government. I want you to listen to this first one. This is a retired Army lieutenant colonel who is on CNN's quote-unquote reliable sources. That's almost like saying Army intelligence. But listen to this clown. This is an Army lieutenant, and I hate mocking or making fun of people that have served, but they're just not all created equal. This is retired Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. Listen up.
Glad to be here, Brian. We all have to do our part in these dreadful, dreadful days in Washington.
What is the most dreadful part about it for you?
Well, the most dreadful part is that we have a president who does not respect our system of government, who does not understand our government, who's not interested in understanding government, who believes that the Constitution is a menu from which he can choose only the most delectable items, who disdains career bureaucrats, who doesn't respect the Constitution. So, I mean, that's one thing, but the evil twin of that is that I believe, as a former Russia analyst for most of my career, and having worked directly with Russian intelligence services, I am convinced that the President of the United States is enthralled to Vladimir Putin. There's no other way to explain his behavior, and he perfectly fits the profile of the kind of people the Russians target. So when it comes to worries, Trump gives us something new to worry about virtually every day, but it's important not to lose sight of the overall picture, is that this is a distinctly un-American president who really doesn't seem to like America very much, certainly doesn't respect it, and he's a president who appears to be enthralled to a foreign power, a hostile foreign power. I mean, this is unbelievable to me. I could never have foreseen this. I was a pretty good analyst, made a lot more good calls than bad calls. I never could have foreseen this, to use a cliched word, this Orwellian situation.
Oh, all right. I don't even know where to start. Here's the one thing, before I go back over these, here's the one thing I remember. This guy just trashed our president as an American-hating president, which is, again, the left is exactly who they claim they hate. But dreadful, dreadful days in this democracy. What is dreadful about it, other than you lost? Other than the skank that ran down the Democratic ticket got beaten, even though they tried to rig the election? What is dreadful? The Constitution is a menu. The last two Supreme Court appointments are constitutionalists. They are every bit the Constitution-abiding people we hope to have in government. He doesn't respect the Constitution. So here's the other piece, and you guys need to. I really want you guys to try and walk away with at least this much. Just because somebody does something or somebody has a job title doesn't mean they're actually good at it. Okay? Just because you're the general manager of a baseball team doesn't make you an expert. If your team sucks, you're just no good at your job. This guy was a former Russian analyst. Okay, So what? What does that mean? That you studied Russia? And by the way, he told you he worked with Russian intelligence. Is he a traitor? That makes him a traitor, right? Because Trump actually had someone who was 9 positions removed from him actually talking to him, who had a meeting in a building, and apparently Trump was a traitor. Collusion and treason, all these other words. You heard that whole definition, that whole soundbite. He didn't give you one example of why he was pissed. He just labeled things that the news has been saying. And you heard the host, just Brian Stelter, who's a complete ass clown in and of himself. But you heard him talk about he was just antagonizing, egging this guy on. What a clown. Next. MSNBC's Deadline. Listen, national affairs analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, John Hellerman. And again, just because you have the job title doesn't mean you're actually good at it. But listen to him talk about President Trump and how he's basically flipping out.
One of the consistent through lines in all of our analysis of Donald Trump is that you can read his temperature pretty clearly by his Twitter feed. And it's one of the reasons why I think his Twitter feed is actually incredibly valuable to all of us, because it does give you a window into the mind, such as it is, of the president at any given moment, and his emotional temper. So I forget how many tweets you said.
14 on this.
14 on this and ongoing. The number of the tweets, the vitriol in the tweets, they tend to be not when he does something like this, goes on a Twitter tirade of this kind, it tends to reflect anxiety, fear, panic, anger, lashing out. When he just wants to make a surgical political strike against, NFL players kneeling, it's 1 or 2 tweets, right? And they're controlled, they're obviously manipulative, but they're calculated. This is not calculated. This is the raging of a guy who recognizes that something is out of his control, that calculations that were made by others, some people he doesn't trust and doesn't like Ty Cobb, like John Dowd, the original legal team, who he always was suspicious of, that he now thinks, wait a minute.
Even though by firing Mark Kasowitz, he put them there.
Of course. But look, don't try to apply logic to Donald Trump. That would be a foolish effort.
Sorry.
I just think he looks back on that all and says, wait a minute.
Yeah.
People who I never trusted and liked, who are always part of this white shoe Washington legal world, who gave me advice that was always contrary to my instinct, which was to fight and lash out, cooperate was what they told him. He never liked that, and now he looks at this and says, wait a minute, is this coming back now to haunt me in some way, and there's information that's been told that I don't know about? I think he's flipping out completely.
I think he's, quote, flipping out completely, unquote. Even though everything he's done since he's been in the White House has been beneficial to middle-class America, the very people he promised he'd help. And it just gets stupider, and more stupid, I should say. On Monday's broadcast of CNN's Wolf Blitzer, another clown, Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat from California, stated that while he wouldn't have gone as far as Brennan did in calling the president treason, Brennan was, quote, within the reasonableness orbit when he characterized Trump's performance as treasonous in Helsinki. Listen up.
Did Brennan go too far in describing the president's behavior as, and he threw out the word treasonous?
I think different people can look at what the president did in Helsinki, the way he kowtowed to Vladimir Putin, and come away with that conclusion. I'm not sure that I would have gone to that length, but I think John Brennan is certainly within the reasonableness orbit to have made that conclusion. And people can also look at the Trump Tower meeting and reasonably conclude that that was collusion.
Collusion is different than treason.
Yes, it absolutely is. And by the way, Donald Trump today tweeted that there's no crime as collusion. That's true. It's just called conspiracy in legal terms. But yes, treason is a strong word. I agree with that.
All right. There was, as you know, the weekend reporting that the White House counsel, Don McGahn, he has been cooperating extensively with Robert Mueller's Russia probe. The president says he encouraged that kind of cooperation, but it's unclear what McGahn said. Is this McGahn trying to protect himself legally down the road? He's the White House counsel. He's not the president's personal attorney.
Right. There was one thing Don McGahn had to do before he could take office. He had to take an oath. And that was not an oath to Donald Trump or to any political party. It was an oath to the U.S. Constitution. So ultimately, Don McGahn's client is the Constitution and the rule of law. That's what he was doing when he was cooperating with the special counsel's office. And I think Don McGahn absolutely did the right thing.
You just can't make it up, guys. You really can't. And it would be funny if it wasn't, if people weren't actually electing these people to office, which they are, which is sad and scary. I'll tell you what, one of the bellwethers I felt over the last decade is a guy who I think is probably one of the smartest, most astute political minds we've ever seen, is Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. And he says what I think I firmly believe now that I watched John Brennan, who, by the way, John Brennan said that in an article on bluntforcetruth.com, he was only aware of the fake Russian dossier because it was in media reports. I mean, this guy is a liar of epic proportions. But I want you to listen to Newt Gingrich break it down and basically saying what I think a lot of people have been thinking.
Why do you think so many Republicans are going after John Brennan? He just admitted. He said, I don't think I'm political at all. What's your problem with him?
Well, the problem with him is he's totally out of touch with reality. I mean, how would you like to have a director of Central Intelligence so lacking in common sense that he thinks he can write a tweet accusing the President of the United States of the equivalent of treason, high crimes and misdemeanors, and then explain that he's really not political? Look, John Brennan is totally political. He was basically a toady to President Obama. He participated in lying to the American people about what happened in Libya and Benghazi. And frankly, Brennan should never have been director of the Central Intelligence. And it's a little disheartening to watch the old boys club get together and write a collective letter, which they did this weekend, in defending Brennan. There is no natural right to retain your security clearance. The president has every right to set up a procedure for repealing it. And in the case of Brennan, his public activities, I think, more than justify repealing it. Finally, he was the head of the CIA during the period they claimed the Russians were engaged in trying to affect the election. Why isn't Brennan a little humbled by his total failure? Look, I think part of what you see here is desperation. When you look at certain Obama-era people, they know that, in fact, they're at the heart of this. I think it's reasonable to guess, and it's a guess right now because we don't have the data, that, in fact, it was Brennan's CIA which led the FBI to the dossier in Britain, and that, in fact, the people were tied closer to the CIA than they were to the FBI. But the deeper point's this. It is an open and shut case with zero question that Brennan was engaged in lying to the American people about Benghazi, knew that everything they were saying was a lie, went along with the lie, and that's why you have the sickness that you have at the heart of our establishment. These people were all willing to lie to the country and in return for whatever political games they were playing, and they all thought they'd be protected because they all thought Hillary'd win and Hillary'd take care of them, and they're all terrified because the more we learn, the worse they look.
And he makes you realize you don't have to be a political science major to understand common sense. John Brennan's been lying since he was a fetus, it feels like. And he and his cronies, who some of were, and I believe it was Brennan who was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party at one point in his life and voted for a Stalinist candidate, is out there doing the things he's doing. Finally, Ann Coulter's got a new book out. And it's going to be good. I haven't read it yet, but I want you to listen to her. She has a way of making the left's head spin in many ways. And she did it again on Tucker Carlson and Fox News' Ann's appearance. Listen to her talk about the left and their thoughts about us and about the president.
With the left, I think it's more that they really do hate deplorables. They hate the Walmart crowd, and that's what they see in Trump. They're able to attack the gun culture and Walmart and middle Americans by attacking Trump without getting called on it because, you know, technically he's a billionaire who's president. But really at the bottom of it, they just think he's icky. And so they go on and on about this existential crisis facing America and Russian collusion without allowing anyone else in their little closed set, so that even smart people, as you point out, they become crazier and crazier, and they are rewarded for being crazy, as John Brennan and Clapper and Comey were. I mean, at one point, it was the left who wanted to chop those three up and feed them to the dogs. And all they had to do is start sending unhinged tweets as John Brennan has, and suddenly he's a hero. I go through in my book not only all of the lies Brennan has told and why he was hated, and for good reason, as head of the CIA and just constantly lying. Left really hated him. Then as soon as he starts sending those crazy tweets about Trump being, treasonous and history will judge you, I just have one sentence of the names he was called after that. One of the most honored men, MSNBC, deep credibility, CNN. Suddenly it's a Cinderella story. Isn't that happy? Isn't that great?
She has a way of things. I mean, she's just honest. You'll see her books. Whether you like her or not, you can't deny the fact that she's someone who busts her ass to put facts on the table, and she does that time and time again. And it's true. Those three men were the bane of the left until they started tweeting unhinged, stupid stuff. Back in just a minute with Brandon Darby.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Censorship is a key issue here, particularly for people on the right. Do you think it was addressed adequately?
Definitely not. It was useful to name check Diamond and Silk. It was useful to check even politicians who had campaign ads that were shut down. But in every case, Zuckerberg was allowed to essentially dismiss the case and move on.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Joining me now is Brandon Darby. Brandon is part of the group that has been putting out the Cartel Chronicles on Breitbart Texas. And if you haven't been able to catch up with those recently, there's some amazing things going on, and not all of it good. Good morning, Brandon. How you doing, buddy?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
It's always a pleasure, man. It's been too long since we caught up, but I want to. I guess one of the things I've been reading, and I'm getting, maybe it's been happening and I haven't noticed it, but it feels to me like the cartel violence on the border is now involving a lot more than just Mexican nationals. You're seeing U.S. victims. You're seeing people of, I don't know why they're people of interest or why they would be, but the cartel is becoming very brazen in their activity. Is it different now, or are they feeling more powerful, or I mean, what's the difference?
I don't know that I'd say they're feeling more powerful, but I think that there's just different groups in control. So when, we've talked about this before, but when you go, when you look at the U.S.-Mexico border, it's roughly 2,000 miles, a little less than that. And a lot of people, a lot of pundits on TV, a lot of politicians, a lot of journalists and other media folk will talk about the border. They'll say, I've been to the border, as though it's one monolithic place when it isn't, right? There's 2,000 miles, and there's actually 9 southwest border sectors, right? 9 U.S. sectors on the border. And several of those sectors are dealing with the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas. Some of those sectors are dealing with the Juarez Cartel and dealing with different Sinaloa factions and the Tijuana Cartel. We could go down the list, but some of those factions are getting more brazen. The Gulf Cartel, the Zetas, they've had some of their leadership taken out, so now you have younger people in positions of authority and decision making who don't care as much about tomorrow, and that's why you're seeing the crimes that you're seeing. You're seeing the crossover crimes. You're seeing, border spillover, the crimes across the border. You're seeing a lot of decisions being made by these cartel bosses and a lot of aggression that traditionally they would have avoided because the cartels would say, hey, this is going to affect our business in the long run, so let's not behave that way. Well, now they don't care. So it's definitely a bit of a problem, but this has been a long time in the making.
Stories like the one that came out today about the murder in, I guess it was at least 10 cartel gunmen in Guadalajara. They basically went into a shopping center. 3 SUVs pulled up and opened fire. Roughly 142 shots were fired at victims before the attackers left the scene unchallenged. The information released by the Jalisco government revealed last week. And it looks like, it looks like kind of the terrorist shooting over in France when they were just walking around hosing down those places in broad daylight. I mean, that to me feels like unchecked aggression. You know, and I guess what I'm curious about is you see the stories about the corruption in the system down there, in law enforcement, in the judges, and if they're not corrupt, they're murdered or assassinated. How do you, for a country like Mexico, how do you increase your efforts to fight these people when it feels like you're fighting somebody you're fighting somebody with an unlimited budget who will go to any length to win whatever it is they need to win to keep their power?
Well, I mean, it's a long, complicated explanation on how to deal with it. But the bottom line is that the United States has a lot of power in determining which of our enemies Mexico goes after. These are people who are killing and destroying U.S. communities with their product.
Right.
There's some of the liberals listening, some of the libertarians listening would probably have an objection to me saying that, and they would say, well, maybe if it's the fault of the U.S. drug users, maybe if you stopped using drugs, our country wouldn't be so bad in Mexico. And in order to believe that and look at it that way, you have to think that people with mental illness or the disease of addiction in the U.S., the poorest of the poor struggling, are somehow more culpable for the state of Mexico than are Mexico's cartel-connected elected leaders and businessmen who are making billions of dollars a year. I'm going to go ahead and put that blame on Mexico, on Mexico's leaders and Mexico's drug lords, instead of blaming U.S. drug addicts living in boxes. I think that's absurd. So it really is a situation where we have a lot of power in Mexico. You know, we've given Mexico $2.5 billion with the Merida initiative. It manifests as a INL effort, where that's our effort to help them build up their system and to go after drug dealers and drug lords and what have you, and crime and corruption. There are people in Mexico, many of these cartel bosses, many of the money launderers, who are in fact known by the U.S. They're on the Treasury Department's blacklist, kingpin list. Many of them have been indicted in the U.S. and are wanted by U.S. justice. But what happens is the State Department in Mexico has to balance political concerns, diplomatic concerns, trade concerns with the law enforcement priorities of U.S. agencies. And right now, during the Obama years, it was U.S. law enforcement agencies were routinely told to balance their law enforcement priorities with the State Department's diplomatic concerns. Well, those same diplomats and that same attitude prevails in the Trump administration. Nothing has really changed. And here we are several years into it, and nothing has changed in Mexico. Like the State Department isn't more aggressively going after these people. We know where they are. We know where they are. The Mexican government knows where they are, but we leave them alone.
Let me ask you this question. I have a couple questions, but my first response to that statement, which, because you and I have been talking about this for almost 2 years, and I remember the kind of the, I don't want to say excitement, but anticipation when Trump was going in. Why hasn't anything changed? Because President Trump did make promises, and they have not been kept. But if you're keeping score, why haven't they changed?
Well, it's actually a pretty simple answer, and that is politics, diplomacy, and trade matters. You know, like when we look at Trump's economy and how well Trump's economy is doing, well, let's talk about Trump's economy. Like the state of Texas the economy in Texas plays a major role in Trump's economy numbers, and that's just a fact. Right. Where a lot of times people up north and workers up north don't benefit, maybe we could make the argument, don't benefit from NAFTA or don't benefit from their factories going south of the border. Sadly for them, Texas does benefit. The Texas economy is heavily dependent upon trade with Mexico. We're sitting right against one of the U.S. largest trading partners, so our economy is almost a guarantee to do well as long as that trade exists. So if Trump were to hit hard on Mexican officials and go after corruption in their ranks and those who are laundering money in the U.S. and helping smuggle drugs into the U.S., if he were to go hard on that and say Mexico decided to start cutting back on trade and working out trade deals with Russia or China, especially China, that would be very detrimental to the U.S. economy. So these are the kind of concerns that they have. It isn't like someone in the State Department has some buddies they're looking out for. No, there are legitimate trade concerns. And there are also legitimate geopolitical concerns when it comes to, if you hit too hard on Mexico and push too hard on Mexico, Mexico's just simply going to become antagonistic as well. And then what's going to happen is they're going to start trying to work out deals with neighbors, and they're going to start playing that game. They're going to work out deals with China, and we're going to have a China satellite south of our border if we pushed it to the furthest extent. So the friendship and the diplomacy does matter. And those are all things that administration officials have to balance. We see this every time there's a new president. Not that Trump is a new president any longer, but we do see this where people are going into office and they make statements and they go into office and they learn that there's a whole lot more to it, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole lot more to it than they thought there was. And I think that's what happened when it came to Mexico and Trump.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much the butterfly effect is part of this. I mean, you can't move and twist the levers of any of these things without affecting something else. I got one more question before we close out. Why have I never heard about a significant drug problem in Mexico? Is it something that exists and we don't hear about? And I asked that for this reason. There's an article you guys wrote, Robert wrote the other day, 50 tons of methamphetamine, 50 tons was seized during a drug raid on the 16th of August by the Mexican Navy in the northern state of Sinaloa. And no arrests were made. The product was destroyed on the site. But does Mexico have a drug problem like we do? Or is that...
No, not like we do. No, not like we do at all because, they don't have the resources that we do. So, people, what you find is that, the more time people have on their hands and the more accumulated wealth, the more they start to ponder problems in life and the more they start to, you start to see such drug usage, most people in Mexico, again, we talk about Mexico as though it's a monolithic thing, and really it's a series of fiefdoms, which half are under the control of cartels, right? So a lot of them are like, if a cartel controls a plaza or an area in Mexico, and they dictate that none of their drugs are to be sold in that area, well, then there's just not the availability of drugs there. Those drugs are coming north where they can fetch a much higher price.
Listen, it's been too long, but keep it up, buddy. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you.
Hey, you as well. Thank you.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
I said that it's the epitome of hypocrisy. Unless you fall in line with their liberal agenda, this uniparty, globalist, liberal agenda, they will never support you. They use the whole gender issue, of course, as some kind of tool to prop up their messaging, but it's the phoniest thing.
Sirius XM Patriot, Channel 125. We want to hear from you. Tweet the show at Garrick38. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Joining me now is the host of Cam & Company on NRA TV. You can find him at NRA TV. He is the one and only Cam Edwards. Good morning, Cam. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you, Curt?
I'm much better. Feeling very good for the students, college students in Texas after the Fifth Circuit decision last week. I'm wondering, Cam, if you could kind of explain what happened. I knew it was going to come. I knew we were going to see some sort of movement against campus carry because it is becoming something that is getting national recognition, even though people don't realize it's been around for a long time. Some professors, some teachers, the administration in Texas tried to step on campus carry laws, and the Fifth Circuit said they've got it right.
Yeah, this was a crazy case. So you had three college professors at UT Austin that sued, saying that the campus carry law, which went into effect a couple of years ago in Texas, violates the professors' First Amendment rights because the professors said that their speech is being chilled because of the presence of these concealed carry holders in their classroom. Then the professor said that their Second Amendment rights were being violated because the state was not ensuring a, quote, well-regulated militia. They were just, handing out these concealed carry licenses willy-nilly. And they also alleged that their 14th Amendment rights to due process were being violated, that the state had passed this law apparently without, considering their feelings. A trial court judge smacked this lawsuit down, said that none of your claims have any standing whatsoever. They appealed up to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit actually wrote a very good opinion. This was a unanimous decision, 3-0, and it laid out the specific reasons why these professors' First Amendment rights are not being violated. Basically, the court said, look, you're claiming that you're self-censoring, right? That you're not going to say what you really want to say because you're afraid of these concealed carry holders, but you haven't demonstrated that that's a legitimate fear. You haven't demonstrated that concealed carry holders are more violent. And as a matter of fact, you haven't presented any evidence to that sort. So you self-censoring doesn't mean that your speech rights are being violated. So they have no First Amendment claim. They really had no Second Amendment claim. The court actually called it a really interesting legal theory. But they pointed out that the Supreme Court in Heller McDonald had separated the prefatory clause from the operative clause in the Second Amendment. The crux of the Second Amendment is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The portion referring to a well-regulated militia, it sets up a purpose, but not the sole purpose for the Second Amendment. So they dismissed the Second Amendment claim, dismissed the 14th Amendment claim, but they did so very thoroughly. So I expect that if these professors, Curt, were to appeal this case up to the Supreme Court would not hear this case. They would not hear this challenge. So I think this particular case is likely at its end here in Texas.
I find it ironic that they were claiming their First Amendment rights were being abridged. To translate, they were saying basically, I can't say the radically left liberal things I want to say because I'm afraid someone with a gun might shoot me.
Right. That seems to be their argument. And here's the thing. Yeah. I guarantee these professors, look, if they live in Texas, they're interacting with concealed carry holders every day on campus and off. When they go out to eat at a restaurant, chances are good there's probably somebody who's lawfully carrying a concealed firearm. When they're driving around in traffic, they're probably driving next to or behind somebody who's also a concealed carry holder. And yet it doesn't seem like these professors worry about that because they're not thinking about it. Right. It never has even crossed their mind. They're just scared that, for whatever reason, when these concealed carry holders set foot onto a college campus, they're going to become, crazy and unreasonable. But the truth is, concealed carry holders in Texas and around the nation are more law-abiding than the general population. In Texas, they're arrested at a lower rate than law enforcement officers are. These are some of the safest people that we have in society. And it is an unreasonable fear to think that, well, if I've got one of these concealed carry holders in my class, I better just shut up because if I say something they don't like, they're going to pull out their gun. That's not who concealed carry holders are.
But that's the impression, not just there, but that's the impression I get from all of the liberals against the Second Amendment is that not only are concealed carry holders dangerous, but they'll shoot me if they disagree with me. And the response, and recognizing that's a national stat as well, right? The NRA, members of the NRA are more law-abiding than actual police officers.
I don't know. I haven't seen any stats to that, but I know that there are an awful lot of concealed carry holders who are NRA members. I know that when the NRA annual meeting comes to town, crime drops in any given city, usually about 20% of the downtown area. You don't see, the arrest blotters full of NRA members who, got arrested the night before. Like, that just doesn't happen. But
you mentioned something that I find interesting. I wanted to ask you this question, and I'm not asking you for a thorough answer, but I'm wondering what you have as a way of recommendations. Chicago, the last couple of weekends, has seen some just upticks that are just, the numbers are just staggering to me. I think we're kind of lost in I think we've diluted the effect that the numbers have been having on us. You're talking about 20, 30, 40, 50 shootings a weekend, men, women, and children being killed. What's the beginning of the end of that? What's the solution? What's a potential fix-it for that situation that maybe I'm not seeing? Because short of sending in the National Guard and literally martial lawing the violent sections of the city, what can be done there?
It's tough, and it's not going to be easy. But the police commissioner, he was very angry yesterday or on Monday when he was doing his weekly press conference. And it's interesting. I'm sure this guy supports all kinds of gun control laws, but that's not what he actually talked about yesterday. He said it's not rocket science. He said we know who these guys are. We arrest them. We keep seeing them back on the street. He said there's no consequences for their actions. So honestly, the first thing that I would do if I were mayor of Chicago is I would convene a meeting with my chief of police, with the Cook County attorney, with the U.S. attorney. I'd ask the U.S. attorney to come in. I'd ask ATF to come in. I'd ask DEA to come in. I'd ask for every alphabet agency that you can think of. And I would say, here's the plan going forward. We're going to find the most violent gang. We're going to find the most violent offenders in that most violent gang, and they're going to be our number one target. And since you guys know who they are and they've got criminal records, we're going to refer these cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office where there are tougher sentences. I don't want plea bargains. We need to make an example of these individuals. We need to offer gang members a way out and a realistic way out. But if they don't take that way out, then we're gonna throw them in prison for as long as we possibly can. Right now in Cook County, Curt, you've got people who are arrested for violent crimes and they're able to bond out within hours of getting arrested, and then they're committing crimes while they're out on bond, and the cycle just starts again. There are so few consequences to committing a violent crime in Chicago right now that there's very little reason to stop. So until that changes, and unless that changes, you're going to continue to see crime and the numbers like we do every weekend in Chicago.
I would like to see, I don't know how you could do it, but I would really like to see some sort of buffer, like a 60-day, hey, listen, guys, for the next 60 days, if you come in and, turn yourself in, we'll wipe the record clean. You got a chance to a fresh start. We'll move something to get that, to just kind of put a jolt in the system, because what's happening now is not working, and it's not the gang members that I care about. It's the men, women, and children that are being shot in drive-bys. It's insane, and I can't imagine. It's more violent than being in Afghanistan. There are more people are being shot every day. And that's crazy to say. I mean, we have active war zones in the Middle East, and it's less violent than an American city. I don't understand how that isn't some sort of national security risk.
I don't understand why it's not a daily national story. That's the other thing is that we get these updates on Monday. National media rarely reports on it. Thank goodness that, you're doing this. But unless you live in Chicago, you're probably not hearing much about this. Unless you live in Baltimore, you're probably not hearing much about this. These are shameful stories. And I don't know if it's because these are Democrat-run cities, and so the media doesn't really want to pay attention too much to what's going on there because it reflects badly on their party. But, the national media really turns a blind eye to this. And, you're right. I care about those good people living in these bad neighborhoods. And even in the worst neighborhoods in America, you've got far more good people than bad people living there. You got a few bad people who are, terrorizing these communities. And you're right. Unless and until you deal with those individuals and you either put them behind bars or you convince them to change their ways, you're going to have these violent communities. That's what it's ultimately going to take. It's not about gun laws. That's the amazing thing, Curt. I mean, you've got the police commissioner in Chicago complaining right now. We got violent criminals. We're arresting them. They're coming right back on the streets. And what's the answer from the gun control advocates? Well, we need another law in the books. Well, the laws that we have clearly aren't being enforced. So tell me why it is we need another law that's going to primarily impact, and in most cases almost exclusively impact law-abiding gunners. Tell me how that is going to make life better for the good people in the bad neighborhoods of Chicago.
I would argue laws only affect law-abiding citizens. I mean that's people just don't get that, especially on the left. But when we talk about this, and I got to close out here in just a second. But when we talk about this, Kim, and you mentioned the neighborhoods, I can't help but think until the people who are being held hostage in their neighborhoods, because that's what's happening. These people aren't able to live a normal, pursue their dreams American life because they're afraid that they could be shot at any minute, and it's a realistic concern. But until they get fed up enough to take control of their own communities or to go out and no more Because, again, you're right. It isn't a majority. The majority of these people are law-abiding citizens who are literally being held hostage in their homes. They have to start the uprising, in my opinion. It has to be somebody has to come in and say, enough. This is it. And because listen, I know every day on Breitbart we have a story, whether it be by AW or somebody else or something out of NRA TV. We have a story. We continue to push the narrative, but that's the only place I read about it. Your show is the only place I hear about it. Armed American Radio, the outlets for us are few and far between in a story that should be everywhere.
Absolutely. And you know, you're right about the community involvement, because that's absolutely key, right? If the community doesn't get involved, if the community doesn't say that we're fed up, then nothing's going to change. And that is absolutely a key component. But, you know, you look at, like, when I married my wife, when I got to meet my wife, she was living in Camden, New Jersey, which at the time was the murder capital of the United States, right? Mid-1990s. And, you know, again, most of the people in her neighborhood were good people. There were a few who were absolute scumbags. But the problem was, you know, rising up. I mean, what did that look like in Camden? There was basically one party to vote for. Because, you know, the Republican Party, I don't even know if they ran candidates in a lot of these elections. And they certainly weren't going around to the projects introducing themselves to my wife and her neighbors. So there's, you know, sometimes I think that we need to make sure that, the good people living in these neighborhoods have those opportunities and maybe know that those choices are available to them. Because if they're not presented to them, how are they going to know that there's a choice out there? You know, and unfortunately, you know, again, in a lot of these cities like Baltimore and Chicago, you've just had one party dominance for generations. That I think it's one of our challenges for those of us who don't live in these cities. One of the things that we can do is to try to ensure that the folks living there do know that there are choices, that you don't have to live this way, you don't have to vote this way, you know, that you can do something and think outside of the box and change things. You don't have to keep, you know, this is the definition of insanity, to keep going down this road, vote after vote and election after election.
Cam, always a pleasure, buddy. Thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely, Kurt. Good talking to you, man.
All right, you too, man. Cam Edwards, folks, at NRA TV on Twitter. You can follow him and them, host of Cam and Company on NRA TV. Thanks again to Brandon Darby and Cam Edwards. My winners and losers today are simple. I'm going to ask you guys to go to Twitter and follow or look at a guy's timeline. The gentleman's name is Ryan Fournier, at RyanFournier. He posted a tweet, and it's a video of my winner today, President Trump. There's a video of a World War II veteran who received a birthday card from President Trump and the First Lady. Why? He turned 100 years old. And the video is of the gentleman reading the card, and it's just really cool stuff. You know, it's just cool stuff. And on the flip side, my loser today. So you guys need to start preparing your vocabulary. Instead of vagina, the Healthline website has said that we are no longer using vagina because it is not gender inclusive. We are now going to start using the term front hole. Yep, you heard that right. Front hole. So instead of calling someone who I think is a weak man the P word, I'm just going to call him a front hole. And I'm guessing that's the opposite of the ass hole, which would be the back hole. Front hole. That is what the woman, front hole. Yeah, I mean, those are the things that apparently are on the minds of the left. Vagina is no longer gender inclusive. You need to start calling a female vagina the front hole. And I can't make that up. President Trump, you're continuing to be awesome. Keep staying the way you are and keep making America great again, because it's working. Now, in the midterms, guys, and I'm going to say this every day now from here until the election, I don't care what you're doing. If you are conservative, if you are an American, please, please, please make sure everybody that you know that is of voting age, that is a conservative, is ready to vote. The one thing we can't do is allow apathy to let them creep back in the door. We took control of this thing in 2016, and this is no different. If you don't think we're going to witness nightmare if the midterms became what the left thinks they are, you're crazy. It'll be crazy. but we need to make sure you are all voting, getting your friends to vote, all of the things that go with it, guys. Vote, vote, vote. All right. God bless you guys. Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you guys tomorrow on the Curt Schilling Podcast. Have a great day.
I want to actually take a couple of the references to Donald Trump from hip-hop. And then we're going to try to see if we can figure out why they like Donald Trump. Jay-Z said, I'm at the Trump International. Ask for me. Raekwon said, I'm the black Trump. They are comparing themselves to what he represents. His wealth, his achievement. Capitalism.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.